So in 1471, one of the worst cases of medieval friendly fire took place as the Lancastrians made one final desperate throw of the dice in order to reclaim the ultimate prize, the Crown of England. For the past 15 years, the Wars of the Roses had absolutely torn England apart under two rival royal factions, the Yorkists under the current King Edward IV and the Lancastrians under the less than competent Henry VI. By 1470 though, Edward had pissed off the wrong people, mainly Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, one of the most powerful landowners in England and soon to become known as the Kingmaker. Being one of Edward's top dogs, Warwick was supposed to be organising his marriage to a beautiful French princess. However, as it turns out, Edward was already married to an absolute povo, Elizabeth Woodville. Warwick was humiliated, and Edward began giving her family huge amounts of power, increasingly sidelining Warwick from the king's favour. He was outraged, fuming, he threw his toys out of the pram and started plotting revenge. Along with Edward's disillusioned brother, George the Duke of Clarence, they begin sponsoring rebellions in the north, capture Edward, soon have to release him as they realise they can't control England in Edward's absence, get defeated by Edward, and then flee to France into the loving arms of one of Edward's hated rivals. Enter Margaret of Anjou, Henry VI's wife, and one of the spiciest characters of the period. For the past 10 years since Edward's accession, she's been exiled in France with her son Prince Edward, plotting to restore the Lancastrians to the throne. And now the unlikely ally of Warwick, who she absolutely despised for removing her husband from the throne originally, but she fucking despised Edward a hell of a lot more, falls lovingly into her arms, and he gives her an army for a cause. Warwick lands in England at the head of a Lancastrian army, with Margaret soon to follow once Lancaster is restored. And Edward, who's dealing with a few rebellions due to his less than popular marriage and nepotism, decides to think better than challenge Warwick and flees to his allies in Burgundy. After a 6-year stay banged up in the Tower of London, the imbecile Henry VI now gets released and restored as king. Everyone lives happily ever after. For 5 minutes anyway. The following year, with the help of his Burgundian allies who are fearing being on the wrong end of a dirty freeway between England and France, King Edward is back to drop the hottest mixtape since William the Conqueror. However, he's not saying, I want to be king again. He's just saying, I'm going to be Duke of York again. A less threatening statement of intent. It's a massive lie though, as soon as support flocks to him, he drops the act, marches on London, which forces Warwick out of a castle in the north, and probably outnumbered 2-1, big bollocks Edward marches to meet it. As night time approached, Edward's bollocks got even bigger. Aware of the Lancastrian superior artillery, under the cover of darkness, Edward sneaks his force right under the line of fire, practically touching the Lancastrian line. Edward had played an absolute blinder, as during the night the Lancastrian artillery started firing on the assumed Yorkist position, which missed them completely as they were right under their noses. His sneak forward had gone unnoticed, and as the sun began to rise around 4 AM on an extremely thick, foggy day intensified by the cannon fire, Edward launches his surprise attack on the enemy. However, with the fog there's basically zero visibility, and the fear and disorientation caused the fighting to be extremely savage. In the overwhelming chaos of the night, the armies had lined up, slightly offset from each other, and the Lancastrian right flank, led by the Earl of Oxford, with their overwhelming numbers, took full advantage of this, crashing in to the Yorkist left wing, led by Hastings, forcing them to rout, and then losing discipline themselves and chasing them off the battlefield towards London. Luckily for Edward, he couldn't see any of this due to the fog, so he remained calm, as the right flank of the Yorkist army smashed into the left flank of the Lancastrian army, in sync with an advance from the centre of the Yorkist army into the Lancastrian one. Soon enough, the Lancastrian right reformed and rejoined the fray. However, it wasn't the enemy they were charging into, it was their own troops, as during the battle, the line had shifted roughly 90 degrees. In the thick fog, Oxford's crest, which had a star on it, was mistaken for Edward, which is sun in splendour, and Montague, the centre of the Lancastrian line, thought this was Edward's reserves piling in, and they started firing on them, not realising it was their own troops. Montague had also just recently defected to the Lancastrian cause, so Oxford's troops now start screaming, traitor, treason, and flee off the battlefield, causing panic among all of the Lancastrian army. Warwick, seeing all of this chaos, now thinks fuck it and flees. However, he's chased down and soon killed. However, despite the victory, Edward's throne is far from secure, as on the day of the battle, Margaret and her son have landed in England. Upon landing, Margaret hears the news of the Lancastrian defeat at Barnet and considers turning back to France. However, her son, the 17-year-old Edward, who apparently all he talks of is war and cutting people's heads off, was eager to reclaim his inheritance and told his mum, "Stop being a pussy, let's go fight." Edward has no idea if they're going to make for London or leg it up north to join with Lancastrian allies. However, it soon becomes clear Margaret is making for the River Severn in an attempt at getting to Wales to join forces with Jasper Tudor and his Lancastrian troops. Edward, who had cautiously advanced his force out of London to wait to see what Margaret was going to do, now makes a mad dash in an attempt to block them before they get there. The Lancastrians tried to cross at Gloucester. However, Edward had already slid into the DMs of the Gloucester governor, telling him to bar the city to Margaret and her troops, as they now make a mad dash towards Tewkesbury, where another crossing is located. The route to Tewkesbury they took, though, was through foul country lanes, slowing them down massively, and it forced them to abandon artillery, which was soon captured by Edward's force, who had now overtaken them as he had the luxury of traversing through open countryside. Both armies arrive half dead through heat exhaustion, with the blistering sun suffocating men in their armour with water at a premium. The Lancastrians had marched for 36 hours straight, and with no escape they dig in at Tewkesbury. Edward's army had also marched 50 kilometres in less than one day, as he also allowed his troops to rest. The Lancastrian force, which slightly outnumbered Edward's, had positioned south of Tewkesbury Abbey in a lovely defensive position on the high ground, where in front they had trees, hedges, dips, ditches, and of course, bitches. Edward, though, isn't an idiot. He's not going to advance in this superior Lancastrian position, so instead what he does is he starts blasting the Lancastrian right flank, led by the rash Duke of Somerset, with his superior artillery, most of it previously Lancastrian artillery, which he captured at Barnet and Gloucester. It was peak disrespect. Hails of arrows now begin to fall on the Lancastrian position, and the Duke of Somerset isn't just going to stand there and take a 12-round beating by prime Mike Tyson, as he had to do something. He now manoeuvres his men down the uneven terrain and somehow misses the left flank of the Yorkist army completely and comes crashing in to the centre of it, led by Edward himself. Although Somerset's advance took Edward's boys in the centre by surprise, they still held firm. However, none of the Lancastrians actually came in to support Somerset. Why? Perhaps a breakdown of communication, they didn't expect the speed of Somerset's advance, or they were just pinned down by Yorkist artillery. Whatever the case, Somerset was pissed. The Yorkist left flank, led by King Edward's brother, Richard the Duke of Gloucester, now joins in the fun and flanks Somerset, and 200 spearmen, who Edward had sent to a forest earlier on in the battle to clear for any ambushers, now become the ambushees and pounce on Somerset's breaking division, as they now all rout and make for the sanctuary of Tewkesbury Abbey. Legend has it that as he's routing, Somerset goes to Wenlock, the commander of the Lancastrian centre, and demands to know why he hasn't been supported during the battle. But before Somerset can receive an answer, he twats open Wenlock's head with a battle axe. He was that pissed that his allies hadn't supported him. With Somerset's rout and leaderless in the centre, the Lancastrian line now descends into chaos and starts running for their lives towards the abbey, and there's a river around here somewhere, and those who weren't slaughtered probably drowned in that. The young Prince Edward now lay dead in the ground, and with it any hopes of the Lancastrians reclaiming the throne. One account says the young prince was killed by King Edward IV's brother George the Duke of Clarence during the rout, where apparently he begged for mercy before Clarence put him out of his misery. Clarence, though, said the young prince died more honourably during battle. Tewkesbury Abbey was filled with many Lancastrians who had fled the battle, expecting mercy as they were taking haven in a holy place. However, the Yorkists said that the abbey was never officially granted sanctuary status, and they were all dragged out and killed, including Somerset, who was tried for treason and then beheaded. Queen Margaret was taken captive, and King Henry VI, who had been banged up in the Tower of London, mysteriously passed away once King Edward returned to London victorious. Now there was no figure the Lancastrians could rally around, and it doesn't take a genius to work out who ordered his killing. After their crushing defeats at Barnet and Tewkesbury in the space of a month, the Lancastrian claim to the throne now lay dead in the ground, leaving the Yorkists free to tear themselves apart from within.